Today we're going to break down the hidden truths behind the Salem Witch Trials. I had a revelation that they were doing during the Puritan or Pilgrim time when they came and first settled. Where is that, in New England?
Yes, it is part of New England, but it is also part of England because New England is part of British colonies, which is also part of England. The England is just a part where the Queen lays, and Salem was also part of England and also French colonies.
Oh.
Even though they didn't work together, they were warring over Salem the entire time, and they thought the witches were not only witches but spies.
But in reality, they were what?
Pregnant women. But yes, there were some witches, but not all.
The witches were the Puritans, I think.
Yeah, but there was also some of the people were actually witches that they were burning, and also the Puritans were witches.
Why would they burn witches if they were practicing magicians?
Because
and warlocks.
Because with war, there's sorcerers on one side and sorcerers on another. Sorcerers burn sorcerers even if they're from the same bride.
Okay, but
if they're on a different side, then they burn each other. They kill each other without remorse.
all right, well, look at it this way. If we love God the Most High, right?
Mm-hmm.
That He gives us magical what?
Powers.
And also magical knowledge, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
understanding, right? And that's how people go, like, how the hell do you know that? Well, because we listen for the Most High's voice, and He leads us into understanding. So what I'm saying to you is, if they wanted to take over this land from the natives, right?
Uh-huh.
They would need what?
They would need all these weapons and sacrifices, and all these sacrifices are basically charging batteries for them.
Right, because if North and South America was originally part of the West, and it was originally I think that it's the Colorado and the Grand Canyon and that whole mountain ridge going all the way up from South America is the land of Canaan. Do you agree so far from what we've been learning?
Yes, so far.
It's been confirmed quite a few times for us through different studies and things. So if that's the case, right, they knew that there was gold there, right? If they're hiding knowledge from us.
Yes.
So when England sent the Puritans over, what were they really? Because doesn't Scripture teach us over and over again to test every spirit, not to go by man's law, but whose law?
The Lord's law.
And are we to listen to another man's interpretation of the Bible?
No, we are supposed to listen to the Bible.
Why is that?
Because men can corrupt it.
And then what happens?
Well, then there's a twisted interpretation, and then chaos arises.
So if they put actual evil men as the heads of the church, of the Puritan church, right? Well, I don't know if you guys agree with us that North and South America were once connected in one landmass with the West, right? And then the Atlantic Ocean was formed. If you weren't aware of that, check that out. They call it Pangea, aka Pangaea, which I think was God separating Pan and who?
Gaia.
And the tribal and the native Indians of North and South America are the lost tribe of Israel, known as Jacob. There's 12 tribes that came from Jacob's sons, but they messed up. They were supposed to go in and kill all these hybrids, right? Mm-hmm. Which were giants, and you had all different types. You had big giant ogres and just giant beings, and then you had little fairies and fays and gnomes. You had all different kinds of hybrids, which were mixed with a little bit of human and then fallen angel, right? But they didn't. They made a covenant with them and said they would make peace. So the crazy revelation I had was that the Salem Witch Trials were used for these alleged quote-unquote Puritan priests or whatever they called themselves, because I don't.
They called themselves Sir and Ma'am Highness.
Oh, Lord have mercy. Okay, well, and my interpretation is that they were really magicians, and what were they called? Wolves in sheep's clothing, right? So they came here, they would build a church, yet they didn't have it as a storehouse for the hungry or the orphans or the women and men whose spouses died, because it was really harsh conditions here. They would ostracize those people, right? And they would leave them to basically be on their own in the middle of the wilderness, right? Mm-hmm. And then when they went to go cut roots and do different medications and different things on themselves, they would get accused for what?
Witchery, and something also called
alchemy.
Alchemy? Yeah, it's alchemy, but it's like
Alchemical?
It's like something alka, but it's alchemy. It has basically the base format of alchemy, but it's like mixed with like some sort of crime.
Right.
It's like alka violation or something like that.
Which in reality is if the town shunned you, right? Because what they would literally do is they would judge you and they would shun you. And if you were poor, they would not take care of you. And again, I'm going to say that God's word strictly states, and this is why I'm disgusted with all of the churches in America, the church buildings. There shouldn't be a hungry mouth. There shouldn't be a struggling single parent, whether a man or a woman. Because nowadays, we have men whose wives just dip out and leave them with 5-6 kids. They need help too. As do the single moms, right? As do the elderly. As do someone that was working and, got sick and can't take care of themselves. But that's not what they were doing. What they would do was they would just plot on each other, and then they would ostracize these poor families for being poor instead of helping them, right?
Yeah, instead of mocking them for not being in the hierarchy with like money and stuff, like the upper class, they always like mocked them for not being in the upper class because there were lower class. There was no middle class. It was just high
elites
and poors, and
the useless eaters.
Well, there was elites, poors, and riches. Which riches were basically elites, but they didn't practice the stuff. And they weren't in that religion. But instead of bringing them up to either from poor to either being riches or elites, and like helping them, they shunned them and put them even farther down.
Right. So being shunned during a time when there's no electricity, right? Mm-hmm. The crops. Oh, and the ground was a curse. They had a frost every year, I read somewhere, during the settling of the Pilgrims and the witch trials. They had frost like every year for so many years. You know why that is?
Why?
Because God curses the land when the people are doing wicked things, right?
Yes, and what was even more wicked about it? Not only would they burn innocent women, but the way they would make them widows, like the men just didn't randomly disappear. They would say, I'm heading out west. But then they would have like people that would jump them and kill them.
They had marauders, they were called, right?
Yeah, marauders, outlaws, mercenaries, whatever you want to call them. And they were for hire. And what would happen is, even though the husband said, I'm going to go explore out more west to maximize our land or something like that, the husbands would never leave on their own. Like, that's not something they would do back then. It was like, you are duty to stay with your wife unless you die. So it was like not allowed. So what they would do is they would venture out, and then these assassins, marauders, outlaws,
AKA who? Who's it really?
I said assassins because the Salem had nothing to do with the assassins or Templars.
How do you know they're still going on today?
Well,
bud?
I don't really know, but like
it makes
in
sense.
that area, there wasn't really a lot of fights between the Templars and the assassins, but that's besides the point. I'm saying that they would hire people for money,
Right.
to when the husband was out exploring, being so innocent.
Or sent out by the townspeople where they built the town that he trusted, right?
Yeah. And what would happen is they would be sent out, right? And, well, this man's just being innocent, trying to find more land so he could get more materials for, let's say, building a house with his wife, his pregnant wife.
And their little children.
And their two little children. This is an example. And then you hear a, and it's a gunshot, or he's just walking and someone jumps from a tree with an axe and cuts his head off.
Now
Kills him, and then they go to the door and say, sorry, your husband has died while looking for land. And then the wife gets suspicious and said, how would you even know that? Because he was secretly doing it. He wasn't, announcing to the townspeople.
Oh.
So...
And I bet you those townspeople wanted her what?
Dead.
No, her land.
Yeah.
Didn't everyone covet each other's stuff back then?
Yes.
Oh,
They
snap.
wanted as much land as possible. So what would happen is the wife would be like, "How did you even know that?" And then the supposed army and forces that were coming to the door, all sad with the husband's coat or some sort of belonging that he had on him, then randomly turn into these. They become demons, and they freaking grab the girl, tie her up to a stake, and then burn her alive.
And they would look through the house and try to find things, anything to pin what on her?
Dirt.
Witchcraft
And stuff. And
meanwhile, who was the ones doing it? Who were the ones doing the ritual sacrifices?
The people who would put them on the stakes. And you know what was even more crazy? The townspeople were somehow already waiting there before it was even announced.
They loved it. They had blood. It was like the entertainment. How disgusting is that?
It's like you know how Julius Caesar did the thing with the Colosseums?
Yeah.
It's like that, but on steroids.
Yeah. So you'd have this. Just imagine it, guys.
I understand the Colosseum because fighting is entertainment, but no one actually not many people died there. They would keep them.
And you're not hanging an innocent woman whose husband just died and she got ostracized from the town people that she lived amongst and trusted, right? But they were really shifty, shady coveters that wanted her land and wanted her blood sacrifice. And they were usually pregnant, you said, right?
Yes.
And they would take, because they had no help from the townspeople, they'd have to go cut roots and berries and all this different stuff, right? Women had to do what they had to do to survive.
Yeah, there is also a reason why the dads got the women pregnant a lot, because the more babies you have, the more land you're actually allowed to expand in Salem. So the more kids you have, the more land you're actually allowed to have and maximize.
I believe that what was the name of them again? I forget, with the P. That came from England. The Puritans that came from England. In my spirit, I really believe that they knew all about North and South America once being one big landmass. And they knew.
Well, why else would it be called North and South America? It would be called a completely different state if they weren't already connected.
Right, exactly. And also, why would they call it New England, right? They knew. So, were there spiritual things going on then? 100%, right? 100%. But how are they happening? From the burning and torturing of innocent babies and women with babies in their bellies, right?
Yeah, and they would do some weird stuff, the Salemers, because there was another form of torturing method which people enjoyed. The stages where they would put the stakes, instead of putting stakes, they would put long poles with these black ropes on them, and they would put a water bucket. They would put a water bucket purposely off the stage, at the edge of the stage, it would be up against the stage, a giant water bucket. And there were these ropes that would reattach themselves to a person. So they would snap one rope, the person would go under the water, and then the rope would reattach and pull it back up.
So basically,
it was called water lynching. So there was one around the neck, and there was one on each arm and leg. And every time one different one would snap, and then they would feel breath in that area, and then they would immediately get dunked into the water because they would fall in a certain way that would make their face go in the water.
So basically, like when you go to an amusement park and they have that thing where the clown or the guy or the person, yes, can sit on and you throw the balls at it, like that, only with ropes around people's necks.
Yeah, it's like a lynch combined with that. It's like a giant tub that they would put, and they would put like a very long thing so they would fall into it. And there were these weird black ropes that looked like, it was like snakes mixed with ropes. It was like a hybrid, but of a rope and a snake. And what it would do is it would reattach itself without anyone ever having to do anything.
I wonder if it had anything to do with petroleum or black goo.
Or like magic.
Yeah, well, where do you think they get the magic from?
The black goo. But that's besides the point. What it would do is it would unsnap one, and then it would be hanging in all these different ways. Like, let's say one of the arms unsnapped, it would be hanging from the side, like it's climbing on a wall like Spider-Man, except it would be dangling, and then the head would snap, and its neck went back and then forward, and its neck landed in the water. And then there would be multiple times where they would snap. There was also another thing where they didn't use the water, and they would just snap every single thing that was connecting. They would snap every single rope, and then they would reattach the rope that hangs you, and the ropes would follow the person. So no matter how farther they got, the ropes would extend and follow the person. So not only were they snapping and re-snapping together, the person didn't have to be in a specific area. It would catch it and drag it back up. So what they would do is every time they would unsnap everything, unsnap every single thing, and then re-snap the neck thing. The noose and part. They would go farther and farther down, and then they would get yanked up. And then they would snap
down farther and farther down into the water, bud.
No, there's a version of it with no water, and
they would try to run away. You mean?
About the water, they couldn't run away because they were restrained
to this rope that is mixed with like a snake. You said,
yes,
which
basically.
Is really like some kind of.
It can extend by itself. It can move by itself. It can unsnap by itself.
So it's like made from petroleum or the blood of the earth. It's mixed with something like that, right?
Yeah, and with the water, they would do a water thing with the water tank, and they would slowly drown them. But then there was another form. If they didn't have any water available, they would do a thing that they also called fun, where they would use the same ropes, the same setup, just with no water. And what they would do is they would, instead of like unsnapping each arm and by one, they would unsnap everything, let it fall, let the person fall, because they have no control of where they're going. Mm-hmm. Let them fall, about to hit the ground, they get pulled up by the neck. Ugh. And then it's like they go farther and farther down, so it goes short, like a second.
So just like the amusement park, they would get let go, they would drop down, they would snap by the neck, and then they would pull it back up and redo it over again?
Yank it back up. And
why am I getting a vision that every amusement park in reality is a copy of a torture device?
Because it probably is.
Oh my gosh.
There was something called...
Hit the like button, guys.
There was something called chain coasters back in the olden times where they would put them in these carts on these rails.
Oh my gosh.
But instead of letting them get off, they would be sent flying into something either very sharp or lava.
See?
At the end of it. Like they would be like a ramp.
So they're mind conditioning us to go spend money at Disney. Walt
Disney.
And go on all these amusement rides, which in reality are a play on medieval. Is it medieval? Torture devices?
Medieval, yes. And there was also, I just need to say this, all the foods at the amusement parks were also some sort of torture device, because the foods as well were based off a torture device. What they would do is they would give them food, right? But then the food would like activate something, and then it would turn into this crazy thing. So like for cotton candy example, it would look like a sugar on stick, like cotton candy, exactly like cotton candy. They would put it in their mouth, and then the cotton candy would turn into spikes.
What?
And then it would go through, and then with the
so it looked like candy, but in reality
it was something disguised.
It was like
it's like a needle in a haystack, but a needle in a giant cotton candy.
So a needle in a haystack is how this whole conversation started. You want to tell them briefly what that is, and then we'll get off.
They would put like needles in these haystacks, and they would sharpen the haystacks, and they would put it in the barrel.
Not the haystacks. They would sharpen the hay.
The hay in the haystacks, yes. And they would put needles all in it. They would put it in the barrel. And
They would put needles with the hay?
Yes, needles with the sharpened hay.
So they would sharpen the hay, and they would take sharpened needles and put them in a barrel.
After they would put them in the barrel with the haystacks and the...
You mean the sharpened hay?
Yeah, the sharpened hay and the needles.
They would fill a barrel.
They would mix it and fill the barrel, and then they would use these 9-inch nails, and they would put holes through it, and then they would watch the blood squirt out of the holes, and then they would kick them down a mountain, not even a hill, like a monstrous hill. And
like a mountain where they were hitting rocks and getting stabbed, and then...
harder and harder every time they got closer to the ground. And then they would have like this special type of ramp, which would like bump them off, and they would go up high, and then they would hit down, and their body would be all crushed.
So how does that translate to what we were talking about with Salem, or the Salem Witch Trials, which the real witches and devils were the Puritans, is what I was trying to get to.
Yeah,
they were wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
Because think about it this way, guys. When they came here to settle, they had to chop down all the trees by hand, right? Mm-hmm. So you had maybe 100 families? And during this time of when they were chopping down the trees and building these cabins and trying to till the land and everything, you had people that once the land started clearing, they were coveting other people's what?
Land.
Right? And these alleged pastors, these Puritans, were so far from pure that it is utterly vile. And did you want to leave off on anything that you remember them doing to the women? You said your recollection or what you've studied, they were usually the women they blamed to be witches were with child, right?
They were pregnant.
Tell me what you were saying about the people in the town. So there's only maybe a town of 100 people?
100, maybe 200.
Tops, right?
Tops.
People dying all the time from accidents, right? It was
accidents.
Yeah, right. Accidents, quote unquote. There was all kinds of harsh living. And when a woman would become a widow, they would ostracize her. So she had no one to help her, right? Mm-hmm. So what would they do? They would blame her to be a witch, and then what?
Before they would blame her to be a witch, basically what was happening is the Puritans were doing exactly the opposite of what they say they are. They were saying they were pure, but in reality they were very dark and corrupt. And that is the whole summation of the thing. They were very enjoying of torture. They loved it, loved it to death. It was like an addiction.
They were sadists.
Yes.
What did you say about most of the women that got blamed for witchcraft and burned at the stake? You said something very vital, that they were
pregnant and had already kids.
So by them burning a pregnant woman at the stake, or putting her in one of these dunk tanks or contraptions where they would take a noose that was mixed with, what'd you say, some kind of black oil snake, right?
Like a cobra.
AKA black goo, right? And they would go up high. They would have a high stage or a high they would build a little stage off of a tree and push them off and pull them back up and push them off until every bone was broken in their body, right?
Yes.
And just torture them. The whole time they had what inside their bellies?
Babies who were feeling the pain, and they already had kids, so that means the kids became orphans because, like we said earlier in the video, the fathers were already killed, and that's how the women were supposedly witches, because they killed their own family, supposedly. But then the kids came out to be orphans, and then the same cycle would be repeated to them, because they were already suspicious when they grew up. And then, it was like a cycle.
So it was generational of wolves in sheep's clothing coming in the name of the Most High God, but in reality doing what?
being so evil and torturing for enjoyment. It was like a 8 to 10 generation cycle.
And the church buildings did not care
At all.
And they did nothing. That Bible, Holy Scripture, teaches that if you have a building, it is to care for the widows, the orphans, the elderly, and the sick. Right?
Yes.
Whoever needs it.
And also, to just bring this around, the churches were the ones that were planning this whole thing. They were the ones operating it from the shadows. They were the ones getting the most kick out of it.
That's right. And they also knew the back history that's been hidden from us.
The church also said that if all the people didn't laugh at the person, they would have the same thing done to them, but worse.
So mocking is a demonic spirit, right?
They were forcing them to mock him.
That's crazy. So anyway, that is our teaching today and our revelation on the Salem Witch Trials. The real witches were the leaders of the alleged church in God the Most High's name. So never trust in man and test every spirit. Thank you, buddy, for coming on again. Love ya.
Love you.
Thank you, guys. And we'll be back soon with another video. Like, comment, subscribe, and say hi to my son in the comments. And we'll be back soon.